My husband never let me drive our son to school, not once in 4 years. He had a reason every time. He said the morning drop-off line at Riverside Elementary was a nightmare, unless you knew the back route. He said our son got anxious when routines changed. He said he liked that time in the car, just the two of them, their little ritual, man talk, he called it, and laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I believed him. I believed all of it, because why wouldn't I? He was a good father. Everyone said so. I was 31 years old, teaching second grade 3 blocks from our house, married for 6 years to a man I thought I knew the way I knew my own name. We had a routine that worked. He dropped off. I picked up. We split grocery runs and soccer practice and dentist appointments down the middle. It looked from the outside like a partnership. It looked from the inside like one too. Until the Tuesday in March, when everything I thought I knew caved in like a floor that had been rotting for years without anyone noticing. His name is Ryan. Mine is Claire. And I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I was not a naive woman. I was not the kind of wife who floated through her marriage with her eyes half closed. I paid attention. I noticed things. I thought that counted for something. Our son Theo was 7. Bright, funny, obsessed with dinosaurs and terrible knock-knock jokes. He had Ryan's dark eyes and my stubborn streak, and he was, without question, the best thing either of us had ever done. Ryan coached his soccer team on Saturdays. He helped with homework without losing patience. He showed up. I never doubted that he loved Theo. That part I still don't doubt. What I didn't know was who else he loved. The Tuesday it fell apart started like every other Tuesday. Ryan left at 7:15 with Theo buckled in the back seat. I poured my second cup of coffee, graded 6 reading logs, and drove myself to school. By 10, I had a mild headache. By noon, I had a fever of 101. By 1:30, my principal was sending me home. I texted Ryan. He was in a deposition and couldn't answer. I texted my sister-in-law, but she was 2 hours away. I felt terrible enough that I didn't want to wait for the regular pickup time, so I decided to just go. I knew the school. I'd been there plenty of times for events, for conferences, for the fall festival where I'd spent 45 minutes face painting small children as tigers. I just had never done the afternoon pickup line. I thought, how hard can it be? I pulled into the lot at 2:50, 10 minutes before the bell. There was a system, a laminated tag in the windshield with your child's name and grade that the teachers use to call kids out in order. I didn't have mine. Ryan always had it, clipped to his visor. I figured I'd just park and walk up to the door, sign in at the office like any normal parent. What I didn't expect was to see my son already outside. He was standing near the side gate, backpack on, and he wasn't alone. There was a woman crouched down to his level talking to him. She had dark hair, maybe late 20s, wearing a gray cardigan. She wasn't a teacher. I knew all of Theo's teachers. She wasn't a staff member I recognized either. She was just a woman, talking to my son like she knew him. And Theo was laughing at something she said. I stopped walking. The woman stood up and saw me. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like a person who has just realized the conversation they've been dreading is about to happen whether they're ready or not. I walked up anyway. "Hi," I said. "I'm Theo's mom." She said, "I know." Her name was Audra. She said it plainly, like she practiced saying it to me, like she'd rehearsed this exact introduction in her bathroom mirror more than once. She was 28. She taught piano lessons out of her apartment on Garfield Street, 12 minutes from our house. She knew my son because Ryan brought Theo to her building sometimes. Not for piano lessons. Just to visit. Theo called her by her first name, thought she was Daddy's friend from work. Kids accept the stories adults hand them without examining the seams. I don't remember exactly what I said in the next 2 minutes. I remember my voice staying very level and very quiet in the way it does when I am working extremely hard not to come apart in a public parking lot in front of my 7-year-old. I remember Theo tugging my sleeve and asking if I was sick, because my face looked funny. I told him I was just a little tired. Audra said she needed to tell me something. She said she'd been trying to figure out how for months. She said she was sorry for the way I was finding out. She looked like she meant it, and I didn't know what to do with that. Her sorrow felt like one more thing Ryan had handed me without my consent. She told me she had a son too. He had just turned 4. His name was Miles. She said Ryan was his father. I drove home on autopilot. I am not sure how. I have no memory of the turns. Theo fell asleep in the back seat inside of 5 minutes, which was the only mercy the afternoon offered me. I pulled into our garage and sat in the car with the engine off and my hands in my lap, and I thought, I have to be careful right now. I thought, I need to know what I'm dealing with before I say a single word to Ryan. I was a second-grade teacher. I had spent years managing tiny humans who thought they could hide things, who put their mistakes under their chairs and pretended they didn't exist. I knew what it looked like when someone had been hiding something for a long time. I knew the infrastructure it required. And standing there in that parking lot, something in me had shifted into a very cold, very clear gear that I did not know I possessed. I got Theo a snack. I sat with him through 40 minutes of cartoons. I tucked him in for his rest with his stuffed triceratops, and I kissed his forehead and closed his door. And then I went to our home office and I started looking. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew that a man who had a 4-year-old child somewhere across town had left a trail of something, somewhere, and I was going to find it. The office was Ryan's space more than mine. He worked from home 2 days a week, did corporate contract law, kept meticulous files. I was not a snoop by nature. I had never gone through his phone or his email or his jacket pockets. That kind of surveillance had always seemed to me like evidence of a different kind of marriage than the one I thought I had. I found the folder in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet behind a hanging file labeled Medical, MISC. It wasn't thick. A few documents. A lease agreement for an apartment on Garfield Street dated 5 years ago, with Ryan's name listed as the cosigner. A receipt from a pediatric clinic on Delmar Avenue for a patient named Miles Audra Kowalski, age 3, with Ryan listed as the emergency contact. And a photograph, printed, not digital, the kind you order from a drugstore, of Ryan holding a small dark-haired boy on what looks like a beach, both of them squinting into the sun, Ryan smiling the way I had not seen him smile in longer than I could name. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time. My sister called at 5:30 to check on me since I texted her I was sick. I told her I needed her to come. She asked if I was okay. I said no. She was in the car within 20 minutes. Her name is Leanne, and she is 3 years older than me, and she has always been the person I call when I don't know what to do. She arrived before Ryan got home, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions until Theo was fully asleep and the bedroom door was shut. I told her everything. She sat across from me at our kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds. And when I was done, she said, "You need to talk to a lawyer before you talk to him." I said I knew. She said, "Tonight, Claire, before he gets home." I said, "He's not home yet?" She looked at me with this careful steadiness that is uniquely hers and said, "It's 7:40. Ryan was usually home by 6. He hadn't texted. I had been so far inside my own head that I hadn't noticed the hours moving. I called our family attorney, a woman named Patricia who had done our wills and our home closing, and I left a message on her emergency line. She called me back in 11 minutes. I told her what I'd found. She told me what to do and what not to do. She told me to take photos of everything in that folder before I touched it. She told me not to let on that I knew anything until I was ready to have the conversation with her present, or at minimum with documentation secured. She said, "You're going to feel like you need to confront him the second he walks in the door. That's natural. I'm telling you not to." I said I understood. She said, "Claire, I mean it, not tonight." I took photos of every document in that folder. I texted them to Leanne, to Patricia, and to my own email. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. I went into the bathroom and stood under the hot water for longer than I needed to, and I cried the kind of crying that is silent because the whole body is too overwhelmed to make sound. And then I turned off the water and dried off and went downstairs and made myself a cup of tea, like a person who did not know the shape of her life was different now than it had been 8 hours ago. Ryan came home at 8:15. He said the deposition had run long. He said sorry. He should have texted. He opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a moment and said something about being starving. Leanne was still there. I told her to stay, and her presence seemed to relax him, give him something to talk about. He didn't look at me strangely. He didn't seem like a man who had anything to fear. That, somehow, was the hardest part. I kept my mouth shut for 4 days. I do not know how. I functioned. I taught. I packed lunches and attended Theo's soccer practice and said good morning and good night, and passed the salt at dinner. I went through the motions of my life with the precision of someone diffusing something. Inside, I was a weather system. Outside, I was fine. Patricia found me a family law attorney named Douglas within 48 hours. I met with him on a Thursday afternoon, told him I had a parent-teacher conference, which was technically true, just not that day. Douglas was 60, quiet, the kind of man who takes notes in a legal pad with a mechanical pencil and asks questions that make you think he's already 3 steps ahead of the answer. He told me what my options were. He explained what co-parenting rights might look like, what financial disclosures Ryan would be required to make, what the existence of Miles would mean for our marital estate. He said that in Missouri, assets accumulated during a marriage are generally considered marital property, and that Ryan's financial support of another household for at least 4 years, possibly more, might constitute dissipation of those assets. He said, "Do you want to know the full picture before we go any further?" I said yes. He said he'd like to recommend a private investigator, just to know what we were actually dealing with. He said it was almost always better to go into a conversation like this one with more information than you needed rather than less. I said, "Do it." What the investigator found in 10 days I will not fully detail here, because some of it is still part of an ongoing legal process and some of it is simply mine to keep. What I will tell you is this. Ryan had been maintaining a parallel life for 5 years. Audra had moved into the Garfield Street apartment a year before Miles was born. Ryan co-signed the lease. He had a separate credit card, opened before our marriage, which is why I had never seen the statements, and he had been running a cashback account through it that went directly into a personal savings account I did not know existed. Not enormous amounts, consistent ones. 400 here, 250 there, month after month after month for years. He had also added Miles to his health insurance, listed as a dependent, under a policy rider that most employers allow for children of the insured, and in the section of the documentation, you only see if you request the full enrollment summary, which I had never had reason to do. My son and Ryan's other son had been on the same health insurance plan for 2.5 years. I sat with that information for a long time before I felt like I could carry it. The conversation happened on a Sunday. Theo was at my mother's for the weekend. Leanne was in my phone, ready. Douglas knew what was happening. I had made coffee. I had not told Ryan I'd made coffee specifically so he would be sitting down with something in his hands, because Patricia had told me people are marginally less likely to get up and leave a room if they're holding a hot beverage, and I was going to take every small advantage available to me. Ryan came downstairs in his weekend clothes, gray sweatshirt, jeans, and poured himself a cup and sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he said, "You're up early." I said, "I need to talk to you about something." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The thing that passes across a person's face when they have been waiting for a door to open and it finally does. It wasn't surprise, it was something older than that. I put my phone on the table between us. On the screen was the photograph from the folder, Ryan holding Miles on the beach. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He set his coffee mug down very carefully. I said, "I'd like you to tell me everything. Not a version, everything." What followed was 2 hours that I do not intend to recount word by word, because it belongs to both of us in a way that I'm not willing to make fully public. What I will say is that he told me all of it. He had met Audra before we got married, briefly, and then again 2 years into our marriage at a conference. He said it had been a mistake that became a situation that became something he didn't know how to undo. He said he had never meant for Theo to know about Miles. He said he thought he could keep them separate. He used the word compartmentalize, and I had to look away from him when he did, because the gap between that word and the word marriage was the most honest thing he'd said in years. He cried. I did not. I had used up my crying already, in the shower, alone, in advance. I had planned for this the same way I planned a classroom, with every resource prepositioned, every contingency considered, because if I let him see me fall apart, he would try to be the one to put me back together, and that was no longer a role I was willing to give him. I told him I had spoken to an attorney. I told him I had documentation. I told him I knew about the credit card and the savings account and the insurance policy. I watched his face as I said each thing, and each time I named something he had hidden. Something in him seemed to exhale, like a person finally setting down weight they'd been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing the ache. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said. "I want a divorce. And I want it to be honest, for once." We filed 4 months later. The process was not simple, but it was, to Ryan's credit, not cruel. He did not fight what was fair. His attorney and Douglas negotiated for 8 weeks and arrived at an agreement that the judge approved without modification. The dissipation claim resulted in an adjustment to the division of assets that Douglas called favorable and that I called the cost of 5 years of lies, settled in a conference room on a Wednesday afternoon in September. Ryan has Theo every other week and every other holiday. Theo knows now, in the age-appropriate way we worked out with a family therapist, that his dad has another son named Miles, that Miles is his little brother, and that this is a complicated situation that isn't his fault. Theo asked, the first time, whether Miles liked dinosaurs too, and I had to leave the room for a moment to collect myself. Audra and I are not friends. We are something more careful than that, and more honest than I expected. We email about logistics. We were in the same room twice during the legal process, and both times she looked at me the way someone looks when they are carrying guilt they have decided to stop running from. I do not forgive her easily, but I also understand that the person who built the situation and kept it running for 5 years was Ryan, and that my anger has a primary address. Miles is 4 now. He has Ryan's eyes. He is apparently very fond of trucks. Here is what I know. On the other side of this, I know that a marriage can look fine from every angle that you have access to, and be rotting in the places you never thought to look. I know that the parts of a life your partner manages entirely for you are the parts most worth paying attention to. I know that the morning I walked into that school parking lot sick and unplanned, with no laminated pickup tag and 101 fever, was the morning my life divided into before and after. And I know that I did not choose that. But I chose what I did with what I found. I chose not to fall apart in front of him. I chose to get quiet and careful and methodical in the way I had always been in a classroom, where the work matters and the feelings come later. I chose an attorney over a screaming match, and documentation over instinct, and as much dignity as I could hold on to for my son's sake and my own. Theo started 2nd grade this fall. I drive him to school every morning now. We take the back route. It turns out Ryan was right. It really is faster. And we have our own thing now. Our own talk. Whatever comes up on the 12-minute drive. This morning he told me that his stuffed triceratops needed a name and he was thinking Reginald. I said Reginald was an excellent name for a triceratops. He nodded seriously and looked out the window, and I kept driving. And the sky was that particular shade of early October blue that makes everything look like it was made to last, and I thought, I will figure the rest out. I thought, we are okay. I thought, this is enough. For today, this is enough. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, the way you think about things when you've had enough distance from them to see the shape they actually were. Ryan made choices, small ones at first, I imagine. A secret kept here, a story adjusted there, and then larger ones, and then ones so large they required infrastructure. A separate credit card, a co-signed lease, a child added to a health insurance policy and filed somewhere he calculated I would never look. Each choice made the next one easier, the way a path through a field gets worn down by repetition until it looks like it was always supposed to be there. He built a whole second life out of accumulated decisions. And the thing about that kind of construction is that it doesn't stay hidden because it's invisible. It stays hidden because the person on the outside has been quietly, consistently directed away from the windows. That's the part I had to sit with longest. Not the betrayal itself, though that is its own long country to walk through, but the precision of it, the way I'll handle the drop off, and you don't need to come to that appointment, and it's easier if I just do it, added up over years to a map of my own life with whole territories missing. I trusted him with those territories because I loved him and because he had given me no clear reason not to. And he used that trust the way someone uses a spare key, quietly, repeatedly, always locking the door behind him when he left. What I know now is that the parts of your life you outsource entirely are the parts most worth understanding, not because the person holding them is necessarily lying to you, but because the habit of not looking is its own kind of risk. I was not a passive woman. I was an attentive mother and a competent person, and I paid attention to 100 things. I just didn't pay attention to the things Ryan had volunteered to manage, because that felt, at the time, like trust, like partnership. I understand now that those are not always the same thing. And here's what I know about the morning it changed. I was sick. I had a fever. I did not have the laminated pickup tag. I showed up unplanned and unprepared and completely outside the routine Ryan had built. And that is the only reason I was standing in that parking lot when Audra was. The truth did not come looking for me. I stumbled into it because one ordinary Tuesday went sideways in the most ordinary possible way. That is both humbling and clarifying. What I chose to do with what I found, that part was mine. The attorney before the confrontation, the photographs of the documents, the 4 days of silence while I got my footing. I am not a person who is naturally comfortable with strategy, but I learned, in those 4 days, that there is a difference between composure and suppression, and that holding yourself together long enough to act carefully is one of the more useful things a person can do in a crisis. I did not do it perfectly. I did it well enough. Theo named his Triceratops Reginald. We take the back route to school every morning now. These are small things. They are also everything.